The sun beat down mercilessly on Cottonwood Springs as they dragged him to the auction block. Once a proud Apache warrior, now paralyzed by the chains that bound him, his eyes remained defiant despite his broken body. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the dry air. $1 for this worthless savage. Laughter rippled through the crowd of dusty settlers and cowboys. No one moved. Then, from the back, a small figure emerged, a barefoot girl clutching a single coin. The crowd fell silent as she approached, her innocent determination a stark contrast to the hatred that filled the square. What secret power would this unlikely pair discover in each other that would forever change the course of the frontier? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Miller house sat on the outskirts of Cottonwood Springs, a weathered two-room cabin with a leaning porch. Inside, Thomas Miller hunched over the table, his carpenter's hands carefully wrapping a piece of cornbread in a faded cloth. "Lily, your lunch is ready," he called, his voice gentle, despite the creases of worry etched around his eyes. 8-year-old Lily appeared from behind the curtain that separated their sleeping area, her brown hair hastily braided, feet bare, despite the morning chill. She wore the same faded blue dress she'd worn all week, its hem unevenly patched where Thomas had attempted repairs. "Thank you, Pa." She took the tin pail, the dent on its side, catching the early sunlight streaming through their single window. Thomas knelt before his daughter, straightening her collar. "Mrs. Abernathy expects you after school. I'll be working late at the Richardson place." "Yes, Pa." Lily nodded solemnly, her eyes older than her years. The walk to the schoolhouse took Lily past the better homes of Cottonwood Springs. Ladies in proper dresses swept their porches, eyeing the barefoot child with mixtures of pity and disdain. Since her mother's passing 3 winters ago, the Millers had fallen further into hardship with each season. At the schoolhouse, Lily sat alone at the back, her tin pail tucked carefully under her seat. Miss Henderson taught reading from worn primers, but Lily's mind often wandered to the stories Mrs. Abernathy told her. Tales of the land before settlers came, when Apache people lived in harmony with the desert. "Pauper girl," whispered Billy Jenkins during arithmetic, flicking a paper wad at her head. "My pa says yours can't even afford to buy you shoes." Lily stared straight ahead, her face impassive. She'd learned early that showing hurt only encouraged the tormentors. At midday, while other children unwrapped generous lunches, Lily opened her pail to find the cornbread and a single dried apple slice. Thomas always tried to include something sweet, no matter how small. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. After school, Lily hurried to Mrs. Abernathy's cottage near the church. The old woman sat in her rocking chair, surrounded by books and curious objects, collected over her 70 years on the frontier. "There's my girl," she smiled, her face a map of wrinkles. "Put the kettle on and I'll tell you about the medicine man who could speak to eagles." Mrs. Abernathy had been a friend of Lily's mother, and now served as the closest thing to a grandmother. Lily, unlike most townsfolk, she spoke of the native peoples with respect, having once been saved by an Apache healer during a fever that nearly claimed her life. "They understand things we've forgotten," she often told Lily, who absorbed every word like parched earth, taking rain. While they sipped weak tea, Lily spotted something gleaming in the dusty street outside. Excusing herself, she discovered a silver dollar, partially buried in the dirt. She looked around, but no one was searching for lost money. "A whole dollar," she whispered, clutching it tightly. Such a sum could buy necessities her father struggled to provide. Yet something made her slip it into her pocket rather than immediately showing Mrs. Abernathy. Later, as the old woman dozed in her chair, Lily overheard men's voices outside the window. "Bringing that Apache devil to town tomorrow," one said gruffly. "Cavalry caught him near Fort Braverman. Says he's some kind of witch doctor or some such." "What for they bringing him here?" asked another voice. "Example, ain't it? Show what happens to savages who don't stay put on their reservation. Sheriff says they broke his back, but he won't die. Just lies there, staring. They're going to auction him off with the livestock, the first voice chuckled. Though who'd want a paralyzed Indian is beyond me. Lily pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. Mrs. Abernathy's stories painted the Apache as wise and dignified, not creatures to be sold like cattle. The silver dollar seemed suddenly heavy in her pocket. That night, as Thomas tucked her into their shared bed, Lily kept her secret. The coin remained hidden in a small pouch she wore around her neck, while questions about the Apache prisoner filled her dreams with uneasy shadows. A small leather bag containing sacred herbs and stones that Ternagazi wears hidden beneath his tattered clothes, representing his enduring spiritual identity despite his captivity. The cavalry wagon rattled over the uneven terrain, each jolt sending waves of pain through Ternagazi's broken body. He lay immobile in the back, arms and legs bound despite his paralysis, a cruel redundancy that spoke to the soldiers' fear. Even wounded and helpless, they saw him as dangerous. Ternagazi kept his face expressionless, his dark eyes focused on the sky above. He had been known among his people as he who stands firm, a name earned not just for his courage in battle, but for his unwavering spirit as a healer. Now that spirit was tested as never before. 4 moons had passed since the raid. His band had been peaceful, trading with a small settlement of white miners who respected the old boundaries. But a new cavalry commander arrived, young and eager for glory, claiming the Apache had stolen horses. Ternagazi had tried to prevent violence, stepping between warriors and soldiers with raised hands. For his efforts, a rifle butt had shattered his spine. Through fever and pain, he had drifted between worlds. The soldiers expected him to die, but something kept him tethered to life. In the shadow realm between sleeping and waking, his grandfather had come to him, the great medicine man of their band. "Your journey is not complete," the old one had said. "The spirits have work for you still." The soldiers saw his survival as witchcraft. They whispered about him when they thought he couldn't hear, crossing themselves and keeping their distance. Only one, a young private named Collins, showed any humanity, occasionally slipping him extra water or adjusting his bindings to ease the pressure sores. "Where are they taking me?" Ternagazi had asked him once in the English he rarely revealed he knew. Collins had looked surprised, then ashamed. "Cottonwood Springs. They're making an example of you." Now, as the wagon approached the town, Ternagazi felt for the small medicine pouch hidden against his chest. The soldiers had stripped him of his clothing, his weapons, his dignity, but they had missed this one sacred item, sewn into a fold of his skin, with a bone needle during his initiation as a healer. Inside were herbs for vision quests, a stone from his sacred mountain, and a hummingbird's feather. While it remained with him, he was still still Apache. The wagon stopped abruptly. Rough hands dragged him out, displaying no more care than they would a slaughtered deer. As they carried him toward a holding pen, Ternagazi glimpsed the town wooden buildings with false fronts, a church steeple, women in long dresses averting their eyes from his near-naked form. They threw him into a cell adjacent to the livestock pens, tossing a filthy blanket over him as an afterthought. Through the night he heard the animals' restless cattle, nervous horses, sensing the predators that prowled the darkness beyond the town. Their fear spoke to him, an echo of his people's displacement. Ternagazi closed his eyes, feeling the contours of the medicine pouch against his skin. He began to sing softly, an ancient healing song that had been old when the first white men came to the desert. The guards shouted for silence, but he continued, his voice barely audible yet unbroken. In his mind, he walked again across the mountains of his homeland. He saw the juniper trees, the hidden springs, the caves where his ancestors had left handprints on stone walls. He remembered the taste of mesquite bread, the sound of children laughing around the evening fires, the weight of his son on his shoulders before the smallpox came. Morning brought new indignities. They dragged him to the auction block, exposed him to jeering crowds. The auctioneer, a man with alcohol on his breath and cruelty in his eyes, prodded him with a stick. "Fine specimen of savage. Gentlemen, Can't walk, but still breathes. Good for scaring crows or entertaining your children. Who'll start the bidding? The crowd laughed, but none raised a hand. $1, the auctioneer finally shouted, desperation in his voice. Ta-Nehisi closed his eyes, reaching again for the spirit world that seemed closer now than the hateful faces before him. His hand found the outline of his medicine pouch. Whatever came next, he would remain near. He would stand firm. The auction square buzzed with activity under the midday sun. Cottonwood Springs' monthly livestock auction had drawn farmers, ranchers, and curious onlookers from miles around. Children chased each other between the pens while men discussed cattle prices, and women gathered in clusters, sharing news and gossip. Sheriff Parker stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face set in a grim expression. He'd argued against this spectacle, but Mayor Wilson had overruled him, claiming it would reassure the populace that the Indian problem was being addressed. Disgraceful business, muttered Dr. Hayes beside him. The town physician was one of the few who shared Parker's discomfort. Nothing to be done now, Parker replied. Orders from the fort. The crowd parted as two deputies dragged Ta-Nehisi to the wooden platform. A ripple of conversation spread through the onlookers, some horrified, others eagerly cruel. Savages deserve worse, spat William Blackwood, the region's wealthiest rancher. Several men nodded in agreement, emboldened by Blackwood's presence. Thomas Miller arrived late, wiping sawdust from his clothes. He'd left the Richardson job unfinished when he heard about the auction, worry gnawing at him. Lily had been missing since lunchtime, and Mrs. Abernathy hadn't seen her. Next item, shouted the auctioneer, red-faced and sweating. One Apache brave, damaged goods, but still breathing. He prodded Ta-Nehisi with his boot. Might make a good conversation piece or a lesson for your young'uns about what happens to savages who resist civilization. Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, though some shifted uncomfortably. Who'll start the bidding at $5? Silence fell. No hands raised. $3. The crowd remained still, some from disgust at the proceedings, others unwilling to waste money on a paralyzed man. $1. The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. Surely someone has use for an authentic savage at such a bargain. Movement at the back of the crowd caught Thomas's eye. His heart sank as he spotted Lily pushing her way forward, clutching something in her small fist. I have $1, her clear voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. The crowd turned as one, faces registering shock, amusement and confusion. A small girl in a faded dress stood before the auction block, her chin raised defiantly as she held up a silver coin. Lily, Thomas pushed through the stunned onlookers. Lily, no, the auctioneer recovered first, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, the little lady has a bid. Anyone care to top $1 for this fine specimen? Laughter erupted, but no competing bids came. Thomas reached his daughter's side, gripping her shoulder. What are you doing? He hissed. They're hurting him, Pa, Lily whispered, her eyes never leaving Ta-Nehisi. Mrs. Abernathy says it ain't right to sell people. Going once, called the auctioneer, enjoying the spectacle. Lily, we can't, Thomas began. Going twice, please, Pa. Lily looked up at him with her mother's eyes. He'll die if nobody helps him. Sold. To the little lady for $1. The auctioneer slapped his hand on the podium, grinning widely. Come claim your property, missy. Sheriff Parker stepped forward. This is madness, Simmons. You can't sell to a child. Her money's good, shrugged the auctioneer, already pocketing the coin. Lily had pressed into his palm. Besides, who else wants him? Parker turned to Thomas. This your daughter, Miller? Thomas nodded, speechless with shock. Then the Indian's your responsibility now. Parker signaled his deputies. I'll have the papers drawn up. On the platform, Ta-Nehisi's eyes met Lily's for the first time. The child who had purchased him stood straight-backed and unafraid, while her father looked like he might collapse. What have you done, girl? Blackwood growled, pushing forward. That there's one of the savages that's been raiding my cattle. "He ain't done nothing to you," Lily replied, her voice small but steady. "You best watch that one close, Miller," Blackwood said, turning to Thomas. "Apache don't forget, and they don't forgive, paralyzed or not. He's dangerous." As the crowd dispersed, Thomas knelt before his daughter. "Lily, where did you get $1? Found it yesterday. I was saving it for shoes," she admitted. Thomas looked from his daughter to the broken man on the platform, then to the hastily scribbled bill of sale the sheriff's deputy was preparing. "What are we supposed to do with him?" Thomas whispered, more to himself than to Lily. "Help him get better," Lily answered simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The auction square buzzed with activity under the midday sun. Cottonwood Springs' monthly livestock auction had drawn farmers, ranchers, and curious onlookers from miles around. Children chased each other between the pens while men discussed cattle prices, and women gathered in clusters, sharing news and gossip. Sheriff Parker stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face set in a grim expression. He'd argued against this spectacle, but Mayor Wilson had overruled him, claiming it would reassure the populace that the Indian problem was being addressed. "Disgraceful business," muttered Dr. Hayes beside him. The town physician was one of the few who shared Parker's discomfort. "Nothing to be done now," Parker replied. "Orders from the fort." The crowd parted as two deputies dragged Ta-Nehisi to the wooden platform. A ripple of conversation spread through the onlookers, some horrified, others eagerly cruel. "Savages deserve worse," spat William Blackwood, the region's wealthiest rancher. Several men nodded in agreement, emboldened by Blackwood's presence. Thomas Miller arrived late, wiping sawdust from his clothes. He'd left the Richardson job unfinished when he heard about the auction, worry gnawing at him. Lily had been missing since lunchtime, and Mrs. Abernathy hadn't seen her. "Next item," shouted the auctioneer, red-faced and sweating. "One Apache brave, damaged goods, but still breathing." He prodded Ta-Nehisi with his boot. "Might make a good conversation piece or a lesson for your young'uns about what happens to savages who resist civilization." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, though some shifted uncomfortably. "Who will start the bidding at $5? Silence fell. No hands raised. $3. The crowd remained still, some from disgust at the proceedings, others unwilling to waste money on a paralyzed man. $1. The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. Surely someone has use for an authentic savage at such a bargain. Movement at the back of the crowd caught Thomas's eye. His heart sank as he spotted Lily pushing her way forward, clutching something in her small fist. "I have $1. Her clear voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. The crowd turned as one, faces registering shock, amusement and confusion. A small girl in a faded dress stood before the auction block, her chin raised defiantly as she held up a silver coin. "Lily," Thomas pushed through the stunned onlookers. "Lily, no." The auctioneer recovered first, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, the little lady has a bid. Anyone care to top $1 for this fine specimen?" Laughter erupted, but no competing bids came. Thomas reached his daughter's side, gripping her shoulder. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "They're hurting him, Pa," Lily whispered, her eyes never leaving Ta-Nehisi. "Mrs. Abernathy says it ain't right to sell people." "Going once," called the auctioneer, enjoying the spectacle. "Lily, we can't," Thomas began. "Going twice, please, Pa." Lily looked up at him with her mother's eyes. "He'll die if nobody helps him." "Sold to the little lady for $1. The auctioneer slapped his hand on the podium, grinning widely. "Come claim your property, Missy." Sheriff Parker stepped forward. "This is madness, Simmons. You can't sell to a child." "Her money's good," shrugged the auctioneer, already pocketing the coin. Lily had pressed into his palm. "Besides, who else wants him?" Parker turned to Thomas. "This your daughter, Miller?" Thomas nodded, speechless with shock. "Then the Indian's your responsibility now." Parker signaled his deputies. "I'll have the papers drawn up." On the platform, Ta-Nehisi's eyes met Lily's for the first time. The child who had purchased him stood straight-backed and unafraid. while her father looked like he might collapse. "What have you done, girl?" Blackwood growled, pushing forward. "That there's one of the savages that's been raiding my cattle." "He ain't done nothing to you," Lily replied, her voice small but steady. "You best watch that one close, Miller," Blackwood said, turning to Thomas. "Apache don't forget, and they don't forgive. Paralyzed or not, he's dangerous." As the crowd dispersed, Thomas knelt before his daughter. "Lily, where did you get $1? Found it yesterday." "I was saving it for shoes," she admitted. Thomas looked from his daughter to the broken man on the platform, then to the hastily scribbled bill of sale the sheriff's deputy was preparing. "What are we supposed to do with him?" Thomas whispered, more to himself than to Lily. "Help him get better," Lily answered simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The auction square buzzed with activity under the midday sun. Cottonwood Springs' monthly livestock auction had drawn farmers, ranchers, and curious onlookers from miles around. Children chased each other between the pens while men discussed cattle prices, and women gathered in clusters, sharing news and gossip. Sheriff Parker stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face set in a grim expression. He'd argued against this spectacle, but Mayor Wilson had overruled him, claiming it would reassure the populace that the Indian problem was being addressed. "Disgraceful business," muttered Dr. Hayes beside him. The town physician was one of the few who shared Parker's discomfort. "Nothing to be done now," Parker replied. "Orders from the fort." The crowd parted as two deputies dragged Tarnagazi to the wooden platform. A ripple of conversation spread through the onlookers, some horrified, others eagerly cruel. "Savages deserve worse," spat William Blackwood, the region's wealthiest rancher. Several men nodded in agreement, emboldened by Blackwood's presence. Thomas Miller arrived late, wiping sawdust from his clothes. He'd left the Richardson job unfinished when he heard about the auction, worry gnawing at him. Lily had been missing since lunchtime, and Mrs. Abernathy hadn't seen her. "Next item," shouted the auctioneer, red-faced and sweating. "One Apache brave, damaged goods but still breathing." He prodded Tarnagazi with his boot. "Might make a good conversation piece or a lesson for your young'uns about what happens to savages who resist civilization." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, though some shifted uncomfortably. "Who'll start the bidding at $5? Silence fell, no hands raised. $3? The crowd remained still, some from disgust at the proceedings, others unwilling to waste money on a paralyzed man. $1? The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. Surely someone has use for an authentic savage at such a bargain. Movement at the back of the crowd caught Thomas's eye. His heart sank as he spotted Lily pushing her way forward, clutching something in her small fist. "I have $1, her clear voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. The crowd turned as one, faces registering shock, amusement and confusion. A small girl in a faded dress stood before the auction block, her chin raised defiantly as she held up a silver coin. Lily Thomas pushed through the stunned onlookers. "Lily, no!" The auctioneer recovered first, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, the little lady has a bid. Anyone care to top $1 for this fine specimen?" Laughter erupted, but no competing bids came. Thomas reached his daughter's side, gripping her shoulder. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "They're hurting him, Pa," Lily whispered, her eyes never leaving Tarnagazi. "Mrs. Abernathy says it ain't right to sell people." "Going once," called the auctioneer, enjoying the spectacle. "Lily, we can't," Thomas began. "Going twice." "Please, Pa." Lily looked up at him with her mother's eyes. "He'll die if nobody helps him." "Sold. To the little lady for $1. The auctioneer slapped his hand on the podium, grinning widely. "Come claim your property, missy." Sheriff Parker stepped forward. "This is madness, Simon. You can't sell to a child." "Her money's good," shrugged the auctioneer, already pocketing the coin Lily had pressed into his palm. "Besides, who else wants him?" Parker turned to Thomas. "This your daughter, Miller?" Thomas nodded, speechless with shock. "Then the Indian's your responsibility now." Parker signaled his deputies. "I'll have the papers drawn up. On the platform, Tarnagazi's eyes met Lily's for the first time. The child who had purchased him stood straight-backed and unafraid, while her father looked like he might collapse. "What have you done, girl?" Blackwood growled, pushing forward. "That there's one of the savages that's been raiding my cattle." "He ain't done nothing to you," Lily replied, her voice small but steady. "You best watch that one close, Miller," Blackwood said, turning to Thomas. "Apache don't forget, and they don't forgive. Paralyzed or not, he's dangerous." As the crowd dispersed, Thomas knelt before his daughter. "Lily, where did you get $1? Found it yesterday. I was saving it for shoes," she admitted. Thomas looked from his daughter to the broken man on the platform, then to the hastily scribbled bill of sale the sheriff's deputy was preparing. "What are we supposed to do with him?" Thomas whispered, more to himself than to Lily. "Help him get better," Lily answered simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Night settled over the small cabin, bringing with it a tense silence. Thomas sat at the rough-hewn table, whittling a piece of wood with mechanical precision, his eyes constantly darting to the Springfield rifle mounted on the wall. Just within reach. Just in case. Across the room, Lily moved with quiet determination, arranging a small pallet on the floor beside Tarnagazi's bed. Her bed, Thomas reminded himself bitterly. She had insisted on giving up her sleeping place without complaint. "He needs water, Pa," Lily said, breaking the silence. Thomas nodded stiffly, filling a tin cup from their bucket. He approached Tarnagazi cautiously, as one might approach a wounded wolf. "Can you drink on your own?" he asked gruffly. "If I am raised slightly," Tarnagazi replied, his English measured and clear. Thomas hesitated, then awkwardly slipped an arm behind the Apache's shoulders, lifting him just enough to drink. The intimacy of the act, supporting the weight of his enemy, made Thomas's skin crawl, yet he couldn't deny the man basic human needs. "Where did you learn our language?" Thomas asked as Tarnagazi drank. "Mission school. As a boy, before I returned to my people." A pause. "The black robes taught me their God and their words." Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "You're Christian?" A ghost of a smile touched Tarnagazi's lips. "I know your God. Whether he knows me is another matter." Lily, who had been listening intent, piped up. "What should we call you? You must have a name." The Apache regarded the child thoughtfully. "I am called Tarnagazi. It means he who stands firm." A bitter irony, given his condition. Thomas couldn't help thinking. "Tarnagazi," Lily repeated carefully, earning a slight nod of approval. "And you are Lily," Tarnagazi said. "The small one with the big heart." Thomas frowned. "How do you know her name?" "I have been listening. It is one of the few advantages left to me." Tarnagazi's dark eyes shifted to Thomas. "You are afraid I will harm her. You need not be, even if I wish to. My body will not obey me below the shoulders." Thomas flushed, embarrassed at having his thoughts read so easily. Can't blame a father for being cautious. No. A father protects. This is the way of all peoples. Tarnagazi's gaze returned to the ceiling. "You should know that men like Blackwood will turn against you for helping me. There is still time to be rid of me." "We ain't getting rid of you," Lily declared firmly, arranging Mrs. Abernathy's herbs on a small cloth. Thomas shot his daughter a warning look, but said nothing. The Apache was right about Blackwood. Already Thomas could imagine the whispers spreading through town, the carpentry jobs that would suddenly no longer require his services. A knock at the door startled them all. Thomas grabbed his rifle before opening it, revealing Dr. Hayes on the threshold, medical bag in hand. "Evening, Miller. Brought some supplies." The doctor nodded toward the bed. "How's our patient?" "He speaks English," Thomas said flatly. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That should make my job easier." He moved past Thomas, setting his bag on the table. "Let's have a proper look at you, shall we?" The examination was thorough and dignified. Hayes spoke directly to Tarnagazi, explaining what he was doing, asking about sensation and pain. Thomas watched from the corner, rifle still in hand, as Lily assisted by holding a lamp closer when needed. "The spinal injury is severe but not complete," Hayes concluded, repacking his bag. There's some sensation in the extremities, which suggests the cord wasn't entirely severed. What does that mean? Thomas asked. It means recovery is possible, though not certain. Hayes handed Thomas a small brown bottle, tincture of arnica for the pain, 2 drops in water, no more than 4 times daily. After the doctor left, Thomas finally set his rifle aside to help prepare their simple supper, cornbread and beans, with an extra portion thinned for Tanagazi. The domestic routine felt surreal, with their unexpected guest. Feeding Tanagazi was awkward for both men, a forced intimacy neither wanted. Thomas was relieved when the meal ended, and he could retreat to his own corner of the cabin. As night deepened, Thomas listened to Lily's quiet preparations for bed. She knelt beside her pallet, hands folded in prayer as she did every night. God bless Pat and me. And now Tanagazi too, she whispered. Help him get better, and help Pa not be so scared. Amen. Thomas pretended not to hear, but her simple faith twisted something inside him. From the bed he felt Tanagazi's eyes on him, watching, assessing. I will not harm your child, the Apache said softly when Lily had fallen asleep. Thomas met his gaze across the darkened room. See that you don't, he replied, his hand resting on the rifle beside his bed. Thomas stood outside Richardson's half-finished house, his expression carefully neutral despite the anger churning inside him. The merchant wouldn't meet his eyes. I've decided to postpone the addition, Richardson said, studying the ground. Times being what they are. You were eager enough 3 days ago, Thomas replied evenly. Said your wife was insisting on it before winter. Richardson shifted uncomfortably. Well, she's changed her mind. Women's prerogative and all that. Thomas nodded slowly. This was the 3rd job cancelled. Since word spread about Tanagazi, my tools are still inside. I'll collect them. Already gathered them for you. Richardson gestured to Thomas's toolbox, sitting on the porch steps. Saved you the trouble. When Thomas lifted the box, the unnatural lightness told him immediately what he'd find inside. Nothing. Not a single saw, plane or chisel remained. My tools are missing, he said quietly. Richardson feigned surprise poorly. Must have been stolen. Shame that. Yes, a shame. Thomas closed the empty box. Both men knew exactly what had happened. Just as both knew Thomas couldn't prove anything. The tools represented months of wages, each one carefully selected and maintained. The walk home felt longer than usual. Thomas passed the general store, where the owner, previously friendly, suddenly became busy arranging merchandise. Outside the saloon, several men fell silent as he approached, their eyes following him coldly. Indian lover, someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard. By the time Thomas reached the schoolhouse, his jaw ached from clenching it. He waited at the usual spot for Lily, ignoring the glances from other parents who kept their distance. When the children emerged, he spotted Lily immediately, isolated, no one walking beside her. A boy stuck out his foot, tripping her deliberately. Her books scattered in the dust as laughter erupted. Thomas started forward, but Lily was already gathering her things, her face composed despite the red flush of humiliation. She'd always been resilient, even before her mother died. Now that quality seemed both a blessing and a burden. Ready to go home, sweet pea? He asked when she reached him. Lily nodded, noticing his empty toolbox, but asking no questions until they were well away from listening ears. They took your tools, didn't they? Thomas sighed. No point lying to her. Yes, because of Tanagazi. People fear what they don't understand, he said carefully, and they've been taught to hate Indians. They walked in silence for a while before Lily spoke again. Mrs. Abernathy wasn't at her house today. Reverend Collins said she's taken ill and can't have visitors. Thomas frowned. The elderly woman had never mentioned any health concerns. More likely she too was being punished for her association with them. At home, they found Tanagazi exactly as they'd left him that morning. Thomas had worried all day about leaving him alone, not out of concern for the Apache's welfare, but fear he might somehow recover enough mobility to cause mischief. The worry seemed foolish now, seeing him still immobile, though his eyes tracked them with alert intelligence. You've lost work, Tanagazi observed, noticing the empty toolbox. Thomas set it down heavily. Nothing that need concern you. It concerns me when my presence causes hardship. Tanagazi's voice remained calm, matter-of-fact. The small one has also suffered today. I can see it in her face. Lily busied herself with the stove, pretending not to hear. We manage our own troubles, Thomas said curtly. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas opened it cautiously to find Sheriff Parker standing there, hat in hand. Evening, Miller. Just checking how things are going. Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. As well as can be expected, considering. Parker nodded to Tanagazi, who acknowledged him with a slight inclination of his head. The sheriff seemed surprised by this dignified response. Heard about your tools, Parker said quietly. Can't prove who took them, I suppose. Would it matter if I could? Parker had the decency to look uncomfortable. Maybe not. Town's riled up. Blackwood's been talking, saying the Apache's presence puts everyone at risk, claiming he was part of the raid on Henderson's place last spring. Was he? Thomas asked, glancing at Tanagazi. I was not, Tanagazi answered for himself. My band traded with Henderson. We did not raid him. Parker studied the Apache thoughtfully. Cavalry report didn't specify which band he belonged to. Convenient to blame all raids on any Apache they catch. Will you tell Blackwood that? Wouldn't make a difference. He's got reasons of his own for wanting trouble. Parker moved toward the door, then paused. Lock your door tonight, Miller. Can't always be riding by to check on things. After the sheriff left, Thomas did exactly that, sliding the wooden bolt into place. Through the window he watched a group of men gathering at the edge of town, passing a bottle between them. They will come eventually, Tanagazi said softly. Not tonight, perhaps, but soon. Thomas turned from the window. Let them come, he said, though his empty toolbox reminded him how powerless he truly was. 3 days passed in uneasy routine. Each morning Thomas would leave to search for work, returning increasingly frustrated as doors closed in his face. Lily would attend school, enduring the isolation imposed by her classmates, then hurry home to care for Tanagazi during the afternoons. It was during these quiet hours that something began to change between the girl and the warrior. Why don't you speak more? Lily asked as she carefully turned Tanagazi to prevent bed sores, as Dr. Hayes had instructed. Despite her small size, she had developed an efficient technique, using leverage rather than strength. Words are precious, Tanagazi replied. White men waste them. My people believe speaking too much disperses your power. Lily considered this as she adjusted his blanket. Is that why you pretended not to understand English at the auction? A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. When enemies believe you ignorant, they reveal themselves freely. Are we still enemies? She asked directly. Tanagazi studied her. You paid a silver dollar for my life. That makes us something else. Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. She brought a cup of water to his lips, supporting his head with practiced gentleness. Abernathy told me Apache medicine men can see things others can't, she said after he had drunk. Is that true? Some are given this gift, yes. Can you see such things? Tanagazi was silent for a long moment. Sometimes, before the soldiers broke my body, I was training to be a healer. Now, he closed his eyes briefly. The visions come and go like clouds across the moon. Lily sat on the floor beside the bed, her small face serious. What do you see when you look at me? A light, he answered simply. Brighter than most. She digested this, then reached for a scrap of paper and a stubby pencil. Will you tell me about your people? I want to draw what you describe. What began as simple curiosity, transformed into a daily ritual. Tanagazi would describe elements of Apache life. Eagle feathers, used in ceremonies, the patterns of baskets, the shape of a medicine pouch, and Lily would attempt to draw them. Her childish renderings were crude but earnest, and Tanagazi offered gentle correction. The feather's tip curves more, like the moon when it first appears, he explained, and these markings represent prayers carried to the sky. On the fourth afternoon, Thomas returned earlier than expected, pausing in the doorway at the sight of his daughter sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing intently while Tarnagazi spoke in his resonant voice. "What's going on here?" Thomas asked, his tone sharp with surprise. Lily looked up. "Tarnagazi is teaching me about eagle feathers. Look, Pa." She held up her drawing proudly. Thomas glanced from the paper to the Apache, his expression guarded. "I see. Your daughter has a good eye," Tarnagazi said. "She sees details others miss." "She gets that from her mother," Thomas replied automatically, then seemed to regret the personal disclosure. An awkward silence fell, until Lily asked, "Did you find work, Pa?" Thomas set down his empty toolbox with a hollow thud. "No, but Sheriff Parker mentioned the Wilsons need firewood split. Not carpentry, but it'll put food on the table." His gaze fell on Tarnagazi. "If they'll hire me at all." "The woman with the healing herbs," Tarnagazi said. Unexpectedly. "She has not visited." "Mrs. Abernathy?" "No." Thomas's brow furrowed. "Reverend Collins claims she's ill." "She is being kept away," Tarnagazi stated with certainty. "How would you know that?" "I dreamed of her last night. She stands at her window, watching this house." "She is well, but afraid," Thomas scoffed. "Dreams aren't facts." "Pa," Lily interjected. "Tarnagazi knew I had a fever coming before I felt hot." She looked at her father earnestly. "He told me to drink willow bark tea, and by morning I was better." Thomas stared at his daughter in surprise. "You had a fever? Why didn't you tell me?" "You were already worried about so many things," she said simply. Thomas felt a stab of guilt. He'd been so consumed by their precarious situation that he'd failed to notice his own daughter falling ill. "The fever has passed," Tarnagazi said quietly. "But your child needs better food. She grows thin." Thomas bristled at being instructed about his daughter's care by a stranger, an Apache no less. Yet he couldn't deny the truth of the observation. "I'll manage my family," he said stiffly. Tarnagazi inclined his head slightly. Of course. Later that evening, as Thomas prepared their meager supper, he noticed Lily placing her drawing of the eagle feather on the wall above Tarnagazi's bed. "What are you doing?" he asked. "It helps him remember," Lily explained. "He says when you're wounded, memories keep your spirit strong." Thomas wanted to object, but found no reasonable grounds to do so. It was just a drawing after all. Yet as he watched his daughter tend to the Apache with such natural compassion, Thomas felt something shift within himself, not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the first loosening of his rigid fear. The axe bit into wood with a satisfying thunk. Thomas's frustrations finding outlet in the repetitive labor. Splitting firewood for the Wilsons paid poorly, but it was the only work he'd found all week. His hands, accustomed to the precision of carpentry, were now blistered from the crude tool. As he worked, Thomas's thoughts kept returning to the previous evening. After supper, Tarnagazi had spoken more than usual, describing plants that grew nearby that could help strengthen his weakened body. "There is willow by the creek," the Apache had said. "The inner bark brewed as tea reduces pain and fever. Juniper berries strengthen the blood. Yucca root helps clean wounds that do not heal." Thomas had pretended not to listen, but each word lodged in his memory. Now, as he split another log, Sheriff Parker approached on horseback. "Afternoon, Miller." Thomas paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sheriff, how's your houseguest? Still paralyzed? Still an Apache?" Thomas embedded the axe in the chopping block. "But I'm starting to think he's not what Blackwood claims." Parker nodded thoughtfully. "Been looking into that. Fort records show he was captured preventing a raid, not participating in one. His band has a history of peaceful trading." "Why didn't you say so before?" "Just confirmed it yesterday. Blackwood has the mayor's ear, and most folks find it easier to believe the worst." Parker adjusted his hat. "Thought you should know. Dr. Hayes asked me to check if you need any medical supplies." Thomas hesitated. "Actually, does Hayes know where to find willow trees around here?" Parker raised an eyebrow. "The creek behind the abandoned Johnson place has a stand of them." "Why?" "Just something I heard might help with pain." Later, Thomas found himself standing by that very creek, knife in hand, cautiously stripping bark from a willow tree. He felt foolish, following an Apache's medical advice, yet here he was. Lily's quick recovery after the willow tea had been hard to ignore. The sun was setting by the time Thomas returned home. He paused outside, hearing Lily's voice through the open window, and then the princess told the knight he was looking in the wrong place. She was saying, the treasure wasn't in the castle at all, but in the forest where the old magic still lived. Thomas peered through the window. Lily sat beside Tenigozi's bed, telling him a story with animated gestures. More surprisingly, Tenigozi was propped up slightly against a folded blanket, the first change in position Thomas had seen him manage. Did the knight believe her? Tenigozi asked, his normally reserved expression softened by interest. Not at first. He was too proud. Lily leaned closer. But when his horse went lame, he had to stay in the forest overnight, and that's when he saw the lights dancing between the trees. Thomas entered quietly, setting down his axe. Both storyteller and listener looked up. Don't stop on my account, he said, awkwardly holding the pouch of willow bark. Lily smiled. I was just telling Tenigozi about the story Ma used to tell me. I remember it, Thomas said softly. Sarah had been the storyteller in the family, weaving tales that enchanted their daughter. Hearing Lily retell them brought a bittersweet ache. He approached the bed, holding out the pouch. I found that willow bark you mentioned. Something like surprise flickered in Tenigozi's eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Don't even know if it'll work. It will, Tenigozi said, with quiet confidence. That night, Thomas brewed the willow bark, as instructed, producing a bitter-smelling tea. He helped Tenigozi drink it, noticing the Apache's right hand twitched slightly when the cup approached, a movement that hadn't been possible before. Your hand moved, Thomas observed. Yes. Small changes come. Tenigozi took a deep breath after finishing the tea. The pain lessens when I am not fighting it. That mean you'll get better? Perhaps. The body has wisdom we do not understand. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas answered it cautiously, surprised to find Reverend Collins on his porch, Bible clutched to his chest. Miller, I've come to minister to your guest. Thomas frowned. It's late, Reverend. The Lord's work knows no hour, Collins replied, stepping forward as if to enter without invitation. Thomas blocked the doorway. The Apache was educated by missionaries. He knows your God already. Collins's expression soured, all the more reason to save him from backsliding into heathen ways. There's talk in town, Miller. Talk about strange teachings and practices in this house. What people do in their own homes isn't the town's business. It is when it threatens Christian souls. Collins lowered his voice. Blackwood and others are concerned. They believe your daughter is being corrupted. Thomas felt cold anger rising. My daughter is my concern, not Blackwood's. Good night, Reverend. He closed the door firmly, turning to find Lily watching with wide eyes and Tanigazi, observing with his usual calm intensity. You defended me, Tanigazi said quietly when Lily had gone to bed. Thomas sighed, sinking into his chair. I defended my right to decide what happens in my own home. Among my people, this distinction would not exist. A man's home and his honor are the same. Thomas considered this, turning the willow bark pouch in his hands. Does this stuff really work? It has for 1,000 years. Tenigazi's eyes held Thomas's. Just as your people have wisdom in building, mine have wisdom in healing. Perhaps there is value in both. For the first time, Thomas nodded in genuine agreement. The moon hung full and heavy outside the cabin window. Inside, Thomas slept fitfully in his corner, while Lily's soft breathing came from her pallet on the floor. Only Tenigazi remained awake, his eyes open to the darkness, his mind traveling paths, invisible to others. As midnight approached, a subtle change came over his face. His breathing deepened, his pupils dilated, and a faint tremor passed through his right hand, the hand that had begun to respond to his will again after weeks of stillness. Grandfather, he whispered in Apache. I am listening. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, though no one else was awake to notice. Teernegezi's consciousness slipped between worlds, a skill he had been developing before his capture. In this liminal space, he could see threads of light connecting all living things, threads normally invisible to physical eyes. A thread of golden light stretched between himself and the sleeping child nearby. Another, thinner strand connected him to Thomas. These were new bonds, unexpected in their formation. But strongest of all was a pulsing cord of light that extended beyond the cabin walls, pulling eastward toward the mountains where his people dwelled. His grandfather appeared as he remembered him, tall and straight-backed, despite his years, adorned with the symbols of a medicine man. "You heal slowly, grandson," the vision said. "The damage was great," Teernegazi replied. "Not all damage is to the body." His grandfather circled him, studying the threads of light. "You form new bonds, not by choice. All bonds are by choice, even when we do not recognize the choosing." The old man gestured to Lily. "This one has strong medicine. She sees with the heart. She is a child. Children often see most clearly." His grandfather pointed to Thomas. "This one fights himself more than he fights you. He has reason to fear me. My people have killed his, and his people have killed yours." The old man shook his head. "The circle of blood must be broken by someone." As they spoke, Teernegazi felt a strange warmth spreading through his legs. Not sensation exactly, but an awareness that had been absent since his injury. His grandfather nodded in approval. "The path to healing opens, but there is danger coming." "The men from town," Teernegazi said. "Yes, and something else." His grandfather's expression grew troubled. "There is a darkness gathering. It seeks to prevent what must happen between you and these people." "What must happen?" Instead of answering, his grandfather placed a hand on Teernegazi's chest. "Remember the way of the healing hand, not just for yourself, but for them." The vision began to fade, but before it disappeared completely, Teernegazi saw an eagle soaring above them, dropping a single feather that floated down between worlds. He gasped, returning fully to his body. The cabin was still dark, but something had changed. He could actually feel, the weight of the blanket on his legs. The sensation was faint, like pressure through thick leather, but undeniably present. Across the room, Lily sat up suddenly on her pallet, her eyes wide. "I saw an eagle," she whispered. Teernegazi stared at her in surprise. "What?" "In my dream, a big eagle flying over our house. It dropped a feather." She rubbed her eyes. It seemed so real. Before Teernegazi could respond, Thomas stirred, awakened by their voices. "What's going on?" he asked groggily. "Nothing, Pa," Lily said. "Just a dream." Thomas lit a candle, casting warm light across the room. "Both of you awake from a dream at the same moment?" His voice held suspicion. "What kind of dream?" "I saw an eagle," Lily repeated. Teernegazi was talking to an old man, and there were lights connecting everyone. Thomas turned to Teernegazi, frowning. "What's this about?" "Your daughter has seen into the spirit world," Teernegazi said simply. "Nonsense," Thomas scoffed, but uncertainty tinged his voice. "It was just a coincidence." "There is no word for coincidence in my language," Teernegazi replied. "Only patterns we do not yet understand." The next morning, Dr. Hayes made his weekly visit, examining Teernegazi with professional curiosity. "Remarkable," he murmured, noting the increased muscle tone in Teernegazi's limbs. "There's definitely improvement in your condition. Can you feel this?" He pressed a finger against Teernegazi's foot. Faintly, like a shadow of touch. Hayes looked up at Thomas, who was pretending not to listen from his workbench, where he was attempting to carve a new set of simple tools. "This is quite unusual, Miller. Most spinal injuries like this don't show this kind of recovery." "He's been drinking willow bark tea," Thomas said without turning around, "and other things." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Native medicine? Interesting." He continued his examination. "The swelling must be reducing along the spinal column. With continued improvement, he might eventually regain some mobility." After the doctor left, Thomas found Lily outside, staring intently at the sky, Looking for your dream eagle, he asked, trying to sound light-hearted. It wasn't just a dream, Pa, she said with the certainty only children possess. Ta-Nehisi says I have the seeing gift. Thomas sighed. Lily, I need you to be careful about these ideas. The town already thinks. I know what they think. She interrupted. They think we're doing something wrong by helping him. But we're not. That evening, Thomas returned from chopping wood to find the cabin filled with a pungent, resinous smell. Juniper branches smoldered in a small clay bowl beside Ta-Nehisi's bed. What's this? He demanded. A healing practice, Ta-Nehisi explained. The smoke cleanses and strengthens. Thomas wanted to object, to throw the smoldering branches outside, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of Hayes's surprise at Ta-Nehisi's improvement, or Lily's conviction about her dream. Instead, he simply opened the window to clear some of the smoke, making no comment on the unfamiliar ritual taking place under his roof. The dog's barking woke Thomas first. Old Rufus, belonging to their nearest neighbor half a mile away, never raised such an alarm without cause. Thomas lay still, listening to the night. A horse snorted somewhere nearby, followed by the murmur of men's voices, too many voices for a friendly visit at this hour. He slipped from his bed silently, grabbing his rifle. Moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating Lily's sleeping form on her pallet and Ta-Nehisi's open eyes. The Apache was already awake, his body tense despite its limitations. They come, Ta-Nehisi whispered. Thomas nodded grimly. How many? 6. Maybe 7. Blackwood leads them. How could you possibly know that? Thomas hissed. The way they move. The scent of whiskey and expensive tobacco. A pebble struck the window, making both men flinch. Then another. The third broke through the glass, scattering shards across the floor. Lily stirred, blinking in confusion. Stay down, Thomas ordered, moving to position himself between the door and his daughter. To Ta-Nehisi, he whispered, can you move at all if needed? Some, not enough. There was frustration in the Apache's voice, a warrior forced to lie helpless while danger approached. Outside, a man's voice called out, slurred with liquor. Miller, bring out that savage. Thomas recognized Blackwood's voice, confirming Ta-Nehisi's uncanny assessment. He didn't answer, hoping against hope they might leave if ignored. We know you're in there. Another voice this time. Towns decided we don't want Indian lovers in Cottonwood Springs. A lantern illuminated the yard as the men approached, revealing their masked faces. One carried a rope with a noose already tied. Thomas's throat tightened. This was no mere intimidation. They had come to kill. Lily, he said softly, go into the corner and stay there. No matter what happens, don't come out until I say so. The child obeyed, her eyes wide with fear as she retreated to the darkest corner of the cabin. Thomas moved to the window, rifle raised. That's far enough, he called out. This is my property. You're not welcome here. Blackwood stepped forward, a kerchief covering the lower half of his face, though his expensive boots and jacket were unmistakable. Don't be a fool, Miller. We just want the Apache. Hand him over and we'll leave you and the girl be. He's under my protection, Thomas replied, surprised by his own certainty. Protection? Blackwood laughed harshly. He's a killer. His kind murdered the Hendersons last spring, gutted the children in their beds. From his bed, Ta-Nehisi spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the broken window. I killed no children. My band traded peacefully with the Henderson family for years. The men outside fell silent, startled by the Apache's perfect English. Don't listen to his lies. Blackwood recovered quickly. They're all the same, savages playing civilized until they get the chance to lift your scalp. Thomas kept his rifle steady. Sheriff Parker confirmed his band wasn't involved in any raids. You're drunk and mistaken, Blackwood. Parker's gone soft. One of the other men shouted. Too afraid to do what needs doing. Last chance, Miller, Blackwood called. Send out the savage, or we're coming in to get him, and you'll be strung up alongside him for choosing an Indian over your own kind. Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. He was outnumbered, but they'd have to come through the door one at a time. He might take down 2 or 3 before they overwhelmed him. Lily whispered from her corner, someone's coming. Thomas didn't dare take his eyes off the men outside. Who? Before she could answer, the sound of galloping hooves approached from town. The masked men turned, cursing as Sheriff Parker rode into view, shotgun in hand. "What's going on here, gentlemen?" Parker's voice was dangerously calm as he dismounted, keeping his shotgun trained on the group. "Just having a talk with Miller," Blackwood replied, "with masks and a hanging rope." "Interesting conversation." Parker stepped closer. "Remove those masks now." Reluctantly, the men complied, revealing faces Thomas recognized. The general store owner, two ranchers who worked for Blackwood, the blacksmith, and Reverend Collins, who at least had the decency to look ashamed. "Reverend," Parker said, "I'm surprised to find a man of God participating in attempted murder." "It's justice, not murder," Collins protested weakly. "Last I checked, justice had a courthouse and a trial." Parker's eyes hardened. "All of you, go home. We'll discuss this tomorrow when you're sober." "You're making a mistake, Parker," Blackwood warned. "That Apache is a threat to every man, woman, and child in this town." "The only threat I see tonight is you," Parker replied evenly. "Now go, before I decide to use this." He patted his shotgun, meaningfully. After a tense moment, the men retreated, muttering threats as they mounted their horses. Blackwood was the last to leave, his eyes fixed on the cabin with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over, Miller," he called before riding away. When they were gone, Parker approached the cabin. Thomas lowered his rifle, his hands shaking with delayed reaction. "Thank you," he said simply as he opened the door. Parker nodded grimly. "Don't thank me yet. They'll be back, and I won't always get here in time." He glanced at the broken window, then at Tana-Gazi on the bed, and Lily emerging from her corner. "You might consider whether this is a fight worth having, Miller." "It wasn't my fight," Thomas answered, looking at Tana-Gazi. "But it seems I'm in it now." After Parker left, promising to patrol nearby for the rest of the night, Thomas swept up the broken glass while Lily pressed against his side, still trembling. "Will they really come back, Pa?" she asked. Thomas couldn't bring himself to lie. "Probably." From his bed, Tana-Gazi spoke softly. "I have brought danger to your home. Perhaps it would be better if I were gone." Thomas looked at the broken window, then at the Apache. "And where would you go? You can barely move." "The mountains. My people would find me. You'd die before reaching the foothills." Thomas shook his head. "No, we'll face this together." The morning after Blackwood's midnight visit, Thomas nailed boards over the broken window, while Lily swept up the remaining glass shards. Tana-Gazi watched from his bed, his face unreadable though his eyes tracked every movement. "Sheriff Parker came by while you were sleeping," Thomas told him. "Says he's spoken to the mayor about last night. Not that it will change much. Men like Blackwood do not fear words." Tana-Gazi agreed. A hesitant knock at the door made them all tense. Thomas grabbed his rifle before approaching cautiously. "Who's there?" "It's me, Mr. Miller." A young voice, barely more than a whisper. Thomas opened the door to find Billy Jenkins, one of the boys who had tormented Lily at school. The child stood nervously on the porch, clutching a small package. "What do you want, boy?" "Mrs. Abernathy asked me to bring this." He thrust the package forward. "She paid me 2 cents to deliver it, and not tell nobody." Thomas took the package, surprised. "How is Mrs. Abernathy?" "We heard she was ill." "She ain't sick," Billy said, backing away. "Reverend Collins told her to stay home or lose her church position. But she sneaks out to her garden." He glanced around fearfully. "Don't tell no one I came here." Before Thomas could respond, the boy dashed away, disappearing down the path toward town. Inside, Thomas unwrapped the package, a folded note surrounding a small, smooth stone marked with a natural spiral pattern. The note was written in a shaky hand. "Dear Lily and Thomas, this stone was given to me many years ago by an Apache woman who saved my life. She told me it was connected to the legend of the healing hand. I believe your guest will understand its significance. Come to my back door after dark if you can." With concern, Margaret Abernathy's Thomas handed the stone to Tana-Gazi, who studied it with evident recognition. "You know what this is?" Thomas asked. "A talking stone," Tana-Gazi replied. used by medicine people to connect with the spirit world. The spiral represents the journey between worlds. Lily leaned closer, fascinated. Is it magic? Not as white people understand magic, Tanagazi explained. It is a focus, a reminder of connections invisible to the eye. Thomas frowned skeptically. And what's this healing hand legend Mrs. Abernathy mentioned? Tanagazi closed his fingers around the stone. An old story among my people. Some are born with the gift to heal by touch, not just bodies but spirits. These ones can restore harmony where there is discord. And you believe this? Thomas couldn't keep the doubt from his voice. I have seen it, Tanagazi replied simply. My grandfather had this gift. I was training to follow his path when the soldiers came. That evening, after ensuring no one was watching the cabin, Thomas helped Tanagazi into the handcart. The Apache could now sit upright with support, his condition improving daily, though he still couldn't walk. Thomas covered him with blankets, both for warmth and concealment. Are you sure about this? Thomas asked. If we're seen, Mrs. Abernathy has knowledge we need, Tanagazi replied, and she has taken risk to contact us. They traveled quietly through the deepening dusk, taking a circuitous route behind houses to avoid the main street. Lily walked ahead, scouting the way with the natural stealth of childhood. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting at her back door, ushering them inside quickly. Her small kitchen was warm and fragrant with herbs hanging from the ceiling. Despite the risk she was taking, her face brightened at seeing them. Thank goodness you've come, she said, embracing Lily. She nodded respectfully to Tanagazi. I've been worried sick since hearing about last night's trouble. You shouldn't have involved yourself, Thomas said. It's dangerous. At my age, caution seems a poor substitute for doing what's right. She gestured to her table. Please, sit. I have something to show you. From a shelf, Mrs. Abernathy retrieved a worn leather journal. This belonged to my grandmother, who came west with the first wagon trains. She lived among the Apache for a winter. After being separated from her party, she opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Here, her account of a healing ceremony performed by an Apache medicine man she called the one with lightning in his hands. Thomas leaned forward despite himself. The faded handwriting described a ceremony where a paralyzed hunter regained the use of his legs after the medicine man worked with him for 7 days. This is just a story, Thomas protested, though uncertainty tinged his voice. My grandmother didn't tell tales, Mrs. Abernathy replied firmly. She documented what she witnessed. She turned to Tanagazi. When I was a girl, an Apache healer used similar methods to save me from fever. She gave me the stone you now hold, saying it would find its way to another healer when needed. Tanagazi nodded slowly. The stone chooses its carrier. This is known among my people. Mrs. Abernathy studied him intently. You were training as a healer before your injury, weren't you? And the girl, she nodded toward Lily. She has the sight, doesn't she? I recognized it in her from when she was small. Tanagazi's eyes widened slightly. You see much, elder. I see what others choose to ignore. Mrs. Abernathy's gaze turned grave. But that's why you're all in danger. Blackwood fears what he doesn't understand, and he's convinced others to share his fear. Why would Blackwood care about an Apache healer? Thomas asked. Because, Mrs. Abernathy said quietly, according to my grandmother's journal, the true power of the healing hand isn't just to mend bodies, it's to reveal truth. And some men will kill to keep their truths hidden. Lily, who had been examining the stone, suddenly looked up. The spiral is getting warmer, she said with surprise. All eyes turned to the stone in her palm. In the lamplight, the spiral pattern seemed to deepen, the stone itself taking on a faint luminescence that couldn't be explained by any natural reflection. A week passed since their night visit to Mrs. Abernathy. Each day brought subtle changes to Tanagazi's condition, increased sensation in his legs, stronger movement in his hands, greater control of his torso. The willow bark tea remained a daily ritual, supplemented now with other herbs Mrs. Abernathy secretly supplied through Billy Jenkins, who had become an unlikely ally. Thomas woke before dawn to the sound of movement. In the dim pre-morning light, he saw Tarnagazi attempting to pull himself up to a seated position without assistance, something that would have been impossible a week ago. "You'll strain yourself," Thomas said, rising to help. Tarnagazi shook his head. "I must push the limits to find them." Thomas watched as the Apache struggled, his face contorted with effort. Finally, using only his arms and abdominal muscles, Tarnagazi managed to sit upright. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "Dr. Hayes will be impressed," Thomas said, stoking the morning fire. "Your doctor understands the body, but not the spirit," Tarnagazi replied. "Both must heal together." As Thomas prepared breakfast, he studied his unexpected houseguest. The past weeks had transformed Tarnagazi from a broken enemy into, not quite a friend, but no longer a stranger. The man who sat in Lily's bed now bore little resemblance to the defeated figure from the auction block. "I've been thinking," Thomas said carefully, "if you're regaining strength, you'll need a way to practice standing." Tarnagazi looked up with interest. "I could build something parallel bars for you to hold while bearing weight on your legs. Carpentry is still useful, even without proper tools." Later that day, Thomas measured the space between the bed and wall, using lumber salvaged from abandoned crates behind the general store. He fashioned 2 sturdy rails mounted at waist height. The work absorbed him completely, the familiar act of creation soothing after weeks of chopping wood and odd jobs. It looks good," Lily said, admiring the finished structure. She had returned from school where she was still ostracized, but no longer actively bullied, thanks to Sheriff Parker having stern words with the teacher. "We'll see if it works," Thomas replied, helping Tarnagazi sit at the edge of the bed. "Ready to try?" Tarnagazi nodded, his face set with determination. With Thomas supporting him, he gripped the rails and attempted to pull himself up. His legs trembled violently, initially bearing no weight at all. Gradually, through sheer force of will, he managed to transfer some burden from his arms to his lower body. "Good," Thomas encouraged, surprised by his own investment in the Apache's progress. "Just hold it for a moment, then rest." Tarnagazi stood, if it could be called standing, for perhaps 5 seconds before his strength gave out. Thomas caught him as he collapsed, easing him back onto the bed. "That's enough for today," Thomas said. Again Tarnagazi insisted, his breathing ragged, but his eyes burning with purpose. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "Once more, then rest." The second attempt lasted slightly longer. When it was over, Tarnagazi lay exhausted, but triumphant. "Tomorrow, I will do better," he said with certainty. Dr. Hayes arrived that afternoon for his weekly examination, eyebrows rising at the sight of the parallel bars. "Your idea?" he asked Thomas. "Seemed practical," Thomas replied, with a shrug. Hayes examined Tarnagazi thoroughly, unable to hide his professional amazement. "The improvement is remarkable. You have sensation all the way to your feet now." "Yes, and some movement in the toes." Hayes shook his head in wonder. "Most spinal injuries I've seen with this severity never show such recovery." He glanced at the herbs drying near the stove. Perhaps there's something to these native remedies after all. After the doctor left, Thomas sat at his workbench, carving a small piece of ash wood, the beginning of a walking stick. He wasn't ready to show it to Tarnagazi yet. It felt presumptuous to assume the Apache would ever walk again. But hope, like an unwanted guest, had taken up residence in the cabin. "Pa," Lily said from the door, returning from walking Dr. Hayes partway to town. "There's something strange happening at the spring." Thomas looked up. "What spring?" "The old dry one behind the church. Abernathy says it hasn't had water in it for years, but now it's bubbling up." Thomas frowned. The town's original spring had dried up 3 summers ago, forcing them to dig a new well. Its revival was odd, especially in the dry season. That evening, as Lily helped Tarnagazi through his second session with the parallel bars, Thomas noticed something extraordinary. The Apache managed to stand for nearly 30 seconds, and when he shifted his weight, his right foot moved deliberately, a small step, but unmistakable. "Did you see that?" Thomas exclaimed. Ta-Nehisi nodded, his normally stoic expression giving way to a brief smile. "The path returns to my feet." Later, as Lily slept, Thomas kept his voice low. "At this rate you might actually walk again." "Yes," Ta-Nehisi agreed, "but not in time." "In time for what?" Ta-Nehisi's expression darkened. "The stone grows warmer each day." The old woman's journal spoke truth. "Blackwood fears what I might become. He will not wait much longer." "You think he knows about the legend, about your healing abilities?" "He knows something, perhaps not the whole truth, but enough to fear it." Ta-Nehisi gripped Thomas's arm with surprising strength. "When I am well enough, I must leave. My presence puts you and the child in danger." Thomas found himself unexpectedly troubled by this statement. The idea of Ta-Nehisi leaving no longer brought relief, but a strange sense of loss. "You're not well enough yet," he said firmly. "Let's focus on getting you standing properly first." That night, Thomas dreamed of the parallel bars, transforming into a bridge, spanning a deep chasm, with Lily waiting on the far side, beckoning Ta-Nehisi to cross. He woke before dawn, the image lingering like a prophecy he couldn't quite interpret. "Today," Ta-Nehisi announced with quiet determination, "I will go outside." Nearly 3 weeks had passed since his first tentative stand between the parallel bars. Now he could take several steps with Thomas's support, though his movements remained labored and painful. Thomas looked up from mending Lily's dress. "Are you sure that's wise? If the town sees you up and moving." "The walls close in," Ta-Nehisi said simply. "I must feel the earth beneath me again." Lily, returning from filling their water bucket at the well, brightened at the idea. "We could go when everyone's at Sunday service. The whole town will be in church." Thomas considered this. The risk was real, but he had witnessed Ta-Nehisi's growing restlessness, the way the Apache's eyes constantly drifted to the window and the world beyond. "All right," he conceded, "but only to the back of the house, where we can't be seen from the road." Later, as church bells rang across Cottonwood Springs, Thomas helped Ta-Nehisi navigate the cabin's narrow doorway. He had fashioned a crude crutch from a forked branch, which Ta-Nehisi used to support his right side, while Thomas supported his left. The journey of 15 feet from bed to door had taken nearly 10 minutes of concentrated effort. Ta-Nehisi's face showed the strain, but also fierce determination. At the threshold, he paused, his eyes adjusting to the brightness of the day. "Ready?" Thomas asked. Ta-Nehisi nodded, and together they stepped into the open air. The effect was immediate and profound. Ta-Nehisi's entire body seemed to vibrate with energy as his bare feet touched the earth for the first time in months. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply the scents of sage, dust, and distant pine. "How does it feel?" Lily asked, dancing around them with childish excitement. "Like returning to life," Ta-Nehisi answered, his voice thick with emotion. They made their way slowly to a flat rock behind the cabin, a journey of perhaps 20 feet that took another quarter hour. When Ta-Nehisi finally lowered himself to sit on the sun-warmed stone, exhaustion and exhilaration mingled on his face. "The land remembers," he said, placing his palms flat against the earth. "Even here, where your people have built, the old spirits remain." Thomas was about to respond when movement caught his eye. Mrs. Jenkins, the blacksmith's wife, hanging laundry in her yard some distance away. She froze when she spotted them, then hurried inside, doubtless to report the Apache's improved condition. "We've been seen," Thomas said grimly. "We should go back in." "Not yet," Ta-Nehisi pleaded. "A few minutes more," Thomas reluctantly agreed, keeping watch while Lily chattered about a butterfly that had landed nearby. Ta-Nehisi listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering the Apache word for things she pointed out: plants, insects, cloud formations. "The world speaks, if we listen," he told her. "Your people have forgotten how, but you remember." Lily beamed at this praise. "Can you show me how to listen better?" Tanahashi considered, then nodded. "Sit here," he patted the ground before him. "Close your eyes and be still." Thomas watched with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity as his daughter settled cross-legged on the ground, following Tanahashi's instructions. The Apache began a soft chant in his native tongue, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow filling the space around them. The air seemed to change, a subtle shift in pressure, or temperature, that Thomas couldn't quite define. Nearby, a scrub jay fell silent mid-call. Even the breeze appeared to pause. Thomas blinked, wondering if his imagination was playing tricks. When he looked again, a red-tailed hawk circled overhead, though he hadn't noticed its approach. It wheeled 3 times above them, then soared away toward the distant mountains. Tanahashi ended his chant, opening eyes that seemed momentarily unfocused, as if seeing beyond the physical world. "What was that?" Thomas asked, unsettled despite himself. "A blessing for this place that shelters us," Tanahashi replied, "and a message sent." "To whom?" "Those who watch." Tanahashi gestured to where the hawk had disappeared. "My people will know I live." Thomas frowned. "You can't possibly believe that hawk will." "Pa," Lily interrupted, pointing to the ground near Tanahashi's feet. "Look." A single feather lay there, rust-red with dark banding. A hawk's feather that hadn't been there moments before. Thomas stared, a chill running down his spine despite the warm day. "It must have fallen from the bird," he said, though he hadn't seen it drop. Tanahashi picked up the feather, examining it with reverence. "A sign of acknowledgement," he said, "and protection." As they made their slow way back to the cabin, Thomas noticed a small gathering forming near the church. Sunday service had ended early, and several townspeople pointed in their direction, including Reverend Collins. Among them stood Blackwood, his face dark with anger, even at this distance. "We need to get inside," Thomas urged, quickening their pace as much as Tanahashi's condition allowed. Once indoors, Thomas bolted the door and checked his rifle. "That was a mistake. The whole town will know by nightfall that you're recovering." "It was not a mistake," Tanahashi countered, still clutching the hawk feather. "It was necessary. The earth has renewed my strength." Indeed, Thomas had to admit that Tanahashi seemed transformed by his brief time outside. He sat straighter, his eyes clearer, his movements more coordinated than before. A sharp knock at the door made them all tense. Thomas approached cautiously, rifle ready. "Who's there?" "It's Hayes," came the doctor's voice. "Let me in quickly, Miller. We need to talk." Thomas unbolted the door, admitting the physician, who looked uncharacteristically agitated. "The whole town's in an uproar," Hayes said without preamble. "Blackwood's calling for a town meeting tonight. He's claiming the Apache is regaining strength to carry out some kind of spiritual vengeance." Thomas scoffed. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Hayes glanced at the hawk feather in Tanahashi's hand, then at the unusual herbs drying near the stove. "There's talk about the spring running again, animals behaving strangely, dreams people are having." He lowered his voice. "And some are saying your daughter has been changed by her association with him." Lily, overhearing this, moved closer to Tanahashi as if for protection. "What are you saying, Hayes?" Thomas demanded. The doctor sighed heavily. "I'm saying you're no longer safe here. Any of you." Night had fallen by the time Sheriff Parker arrived at the Miller cabin. His expression was grave as Thomas let him in, noting the absence of the usual confident stride. "How bad is it?" Thomas asked, without preamble. Parker removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Bad enough. Town meeting just broke up." He nodded a greeting to Tanahashi, who sat alert by the fire, and to Lily, who watched wide-eyed from her pallet. "Blackwood's convinced half the town that your Apache friend here is practicing some kind of witchcraft," Parker continued. "Says that's how he's recovering, and claims he's using it to control minds." "That's absurd," Thomas scoffed. Parker sighed. "Is it? The spring that's been dry for years suddenly flows again. Birds are nesting out of season. 3 different people claim they've dreamed of an Apache walking through their homes at night, though their doors were locked." Thomas glanced at Tanahashi, whose face remained impassive, though his eyes held a knowing look. What exactly did Blackwood say? Thomas asked. Parker unpinned his badge and set it on the table, a gesture that Thomas understood immediately. Whatever came next was unofficial. He says the Apache isn't just any warrior, but a powerful medicine man who's gathering strength for revenge. Claims your daughter is under his influence, being used as a channel for his powers. Parker's voice lowered. And he's convinced Mayor Wilson that once the Apache is strong enough to walk, he'll use his abilities to lead his people in an attack on Cottonwood Springs. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, Thomas said, though uncertainty colored his voice as he remembered the hawk feather appearing from nowhere. Is it true? Lily suddenly asked Tanagazi. Are you going to hurt people when you can walk again? Tanagazi met her gaze, steady. I seek healing, not vengeance, but Blackwood speaks with forked tongue. He fears me for reasons he does not share with others. What reasons? Parker asked sharply. The truth sees in darkness what lies hid in daylight, Tanagazi replied cryptically. Blackwood fears what I might remember. Parker's brow furrowed. You've encountered him before? Perhaps. Many white men look the same to us at first, Tanagazi said, though something in his tone suggested he knew more than he was saying. Thomas interceded. What's coming, Sheriff? That's what we need to know. Parker reclaimed his badge, pinning it back on his vest, returning to official capacity. Blackwood's gathered about 20 men. They're armed. They've been drinking, and they're planning to come for him tomorrow night. He nodded toward Tanagazi. And you'll stop them, Thomas pressed. Parker's expression was answer enough. The mayor's authorized a citizens' committee to address the Apache threat. Officially, my hands are tied. So you're just going to let them lynch him? Thomas demanded, anger rising. I'm warning you, Parker corrected. So you have time to get out, all of you. He looked pointedly at Lily. They're calling her witch-touched now. It isn't safe for any of you. Lily moved closer to her father, her small face pale but determined. We can't leave, she said. Tanagazi still can't walk properly. I can walk enough, Tanagazi interjected, surprising them all. With deliberate movements he used the crutch to pull himself upright. Though his legs trembled with the effort, he managed to stand unassisted for the first time. I will not be the cause of harm to you or your father. Where would we even go? Thomas asked Parker. Fort Braverman, maybe. There's a new commander who might listen. Or north to Prescott, where they're more progressive about Indian affairs. Parker headed for the door. But not west. Blackwood has men watching the road to California. When should we leave? Thomas asked, already mentally cataloguing their meager possessions. Dawn would be best. Most of the town will be sleeping off tonight's meeting. Parker paused at the door. I'll ride patrol on the East Road early tomorrow. If I happen to see you folks heading that way, I'll make sure you're not followed. After Parker left, silence hung heavy in the cabin. Thomas stared at the few possessions that made up their life, items too large to carry, too precious to leave. I'm sorry, Tanagazi said quietly. This burden was not yours to bear. We made our choice at the auction, Thomas replied, more steadily than he felt. Lily, start packing only what you can carry. We'll leave before first light. As Lily began gathering her few belongings, Tanagazi lowered himself carefully back to his seat. There is another way, he said. What do you mean? I could go alone, into the mountains. My people would find me. Thomas shook his head firmly. You'd never make it. Even standing takes all your strength.